funding. So it's Hyundai Motor India, TVS Motor Company, and several small and medium Korean and Indian companies who support us. We work on a dotted line with the embassies of India in Korea and the Korean embassies in India, consulates here. But we have a certain precious independence of space, which allows us to program and to be sometimes quite risque in what we take up as projects, and also gives us that ability to, deep dive into this discussion with concentrated residencies, travel to either country. So it's not a jet in, jet out or simply presenting. It's also about creating. It's also about reception and understanding how we can unpeel bit by bit this kind of very interesting dialogue that is happening. So in 2006, when we were set up, I must say that there was precious little differentiation between Korea, Japan, and China. It was just seen as one sort of far north phenomenon, impacting us slightly, but not quite articulated. Several Korean companies by that time in India, especially in Sri Perumbudur, the outskirts of Chennai, starting about 25 years ago with Hyundai Motor opening its first factory. And what happened was a very historic move after that, where you had several Korean companies coming in to support this major chaebol, along with Samsung, who had also set up shop. So within a very short time, in 2006, we had about 60 companies maybe. Now we're looking at something like 200 companies, 250 companies, small, medium, and all of them are suppliers, vendors to Hyundai mainly, but also Samsung, LG. Now you find that these three, just top of the list, find a place in almost every Indian middle class, upper class home. So whether it's Hyundai cars or Samsung phones or LG washing machines, as a commodity, as a high quality consumer brand, this has already seeped into India. It has already become the product of choice from a country perhaps little known. We've had instances where people have confused Nokia phones with Korea and said, is Nokia a Korean company? And gradually, you have found that these Korean companies have come right on top in terms of recall and in terms of their product range and their product receptivity in India. Part of the reason being that they have been very, very smart in localizing what is a global entity. So you will find in all of their advertorials, advertisements, in all of their marketing campaigns, the emphasis is so much on how here is a product made in India and made for India. So there is that very emotive connect which has already been set up. So this is on the economic side of it. If you'd like, you can call this the sort of hard power, where along with sort of strategic, political and other links, there have been the SEPA agreement, for instance, which is about trade and partnership. You have found that the South Korean government and the Indian government have been quite active from very early days in establishing this kind of a connect and in working towards developing their economies side by side. Korea, as you know, after the Korean War, 1952-53, has been recognized as an incredible country which, phoenix-like, arose from the ashes of war to become the 11th largest economy in the world. And how did that happen? They call it the miracle on the Han River, and they say it is sheer grit and determination by the Korean people, but led by a very astute leadership which aimed at working this strategically to bring Korea to this position. Now, before any kind of cultural connect happened, and I think that is quite a recent phenomenon, there has, of course, always been the sort of underground connect, if you like, which has happened. And in the days before social media, this was less easy to track. And we found in India the first inkling of this, perhaps in the northeast of India, where in the early days, in the 50s and 60s, there was an anti-Hindi backlash, and there was an active blockage of Hindi content, both in the theaters as well as on television. And what really happened is, in the gap created thereof, South Korean content, especially led by Arirang, which is state TV, came straight in with Korean serials, a little bit of talk shows, some amount of music, which straight away gave an opening. And these were all produced and presented in original Korean, not as dubbed versions. Very early, the citizenry of that part of India was exposed to something which initially perhaps quite foreign, but interestingly something that had an emotive touch, which had a sensational connect. Why do I say sensational? It's because a lot of it was to do with visually consuming what was presented. So the importance of the visual angle, and as I said, all related senses, cannot be undermined. And happily, this coincided with the opening up of television space, and this opened up a lot of opportunities, particularly in the Northeast, but slowly into other parts of India. Very early in the, let's say, the late 1900s, 2000, we had dubbed versions which came in to greater or lesser degrees of success. In 2006, when we opened, we had Bong Joon-ho's Guemul, which was released by an Indian company, a production company here, a distribution company. And they chose to introduce this film, which is a very clever film actually, introduce this film in regional languages. So Malayalam, Telugu, Tamil, as well as in Hindi, across several hundred screens in India. We chose to present this in original Korean with subtitles, and it was vastly different from watching the dubbed version. Now, Guemul, if any of you have seen it, it opens with this very interesting scene of it's in a lab, and a Korean scientist pours formaldehyde into the Han River. So metaphorically, symbolically, that's a huge, huge comment. And what comes out of that, what emerges out of that, is a very strange monster. It's not one of your Godzilla type of monsters. It's more like a kind of a funny lizard type of thing running around and generally scaring the public. And there is this classic case of a family's trauma as against state-created fear, where they deflect from what is happening on a personal level and talk about this larger problem, the state of fear kind of situation, which this monster has unleashed. Of course, it is a very thinly veiled comment on American tropes and on American cinema, which talks about these huge monster flicks, which is talking about, how it's almost the end of the world scenario, and then you have an American solution to how to save the world. And therefore, ... from a kind of cultural, creative, sensory angle to how you can look at the sort of hegemonic presence, American presence, which to this day continues. So I mentioned Bong Joon-ho simply because when we fast forward, he won the Oscar, and he spoke about if we get over the tyranny of the 1-inch subtitle, everything can spill over. It doesn't really matter in what language this is happening. This can become a cultural phenomenon which many people relate to across the world. Yesterday, Professor Kim spoke about this, and there were questions about whether it was a bit of a tokenistic act that Parasite was selected and Parasite was given this award. That's debatable, and we can talk about it. But nevertheless, it has broken through what is one of the topmost paradigms of recognition, and it has been who agrees that this is the topmost is again contestable. But then it is something there, just like the Oscars and the Grammys. We've had our own share with A.R. Rahman and Slumdog Millionaire. Many questions asked, would it have happened if it was a thorough Bollywood film? Would something have been picked up? Do you need a sort of English intervention of a director to be able to be recognized on the world stage? So these are all questions which are there for us to debate. Now, from a sensational or sensory angle, how does something become a little more than that? Because by its very nature, anything which is sensory is temporary. It is something that happens at the moment. And it's very much like the Instagrammable generation of today, where you find a lot of youngsters, before they tuck into their meal, they take a lovely photo, they put it up there because they want to share it with their friends. And that's instant at the moment. Now, how does that gain traction to become something more than just temporary, something more than just fleeting? And here I go back to what Dr. Lata asked, the question she asked yesterday, where she said, is this fad something temporary? Will it go away? Will it, is it ephemeral? Now, culture by its very nature, and culture, I'm using it in its broadest sense, extremely complex term, but I'm using it in its broadest sense of any kind of interaction that is fairly 360 in the way in which we connect. So in InKo Center, we have three words which we keep coming back to. So it's discover, engage, and connect. So this again does not have to be in any kind of trajectory where it's one leading to the other. You could discover something, and by discovering that and enjoying that, you could connect. By connecting, in order to connect, you have to engage. And you can come all the way back to discovering something new again. Now, this has happened with us time and again with all our projects, whether it is Indian and Korean ceramic artists working together, whether it is literature residencies, whether it is Korean flower arrangement, where we look at what is so different and distinct about Korean flower arrangement and ikebana, for instance. Or how do we relate to flower arrangement, where we don't look at it as something stuck in a vase. We look at forms of worship. We look at decorative elements, whether it is on your hair or on the ground. So what are these similarities? What are these differences? How do we recognize and celebrate and very respectfully engage with these different phenomena? So looking at the local characteristic of something and the global dimension of it is, I think, now an imperative. We can't look at only the local. We can't look at only the global. There is a word called glocal, which is doing the rounds, but I think I would just use it as a sort of referential frame. We often look at something and we re-examine what we already know. So the K factor, which if you go way back into a sort of historical tracing of this movement, So Taiji and the team in 1992 up to about 1996, they were responding to the auditions, which yesterday Professor Kim also referred to, the auditions done at the American base camps, the tremendous influence of Afro-American jazz and other musical genres, hip-hop which came in, which has become such a trend now and continues to remain and rule, rap which was there, all of which were quite foreign to Korea, foreign to Korean ethnic identity, but something that in order to gain acceptance and to gain legitimacy was followed and picked up. So Taiji is one of the first who did this and seems in that sense a pioneer of his times, both in terms of the way he dressed and what he brought in. Very quickly, he was one of the founders of what is even today a very big company, YG, which was into the production of Korean content. So 1990s, not much of that filtered through here. As I said, early 2000s, with the backlash in the Northeast, it started trickling through with Arirang TV coming in. Very soon you had a lot of people in that region relating not just to Korean music and trends in the performing arts sector, but also relating to food habits, relating to fashion trends, And also, I think there was a distinct feeling of being separate from the Indian subcontinent and somehow closer. They felt somehow closer to that part of the world where there was a lot coming through to them in its original sort of sense. Now, in 2006, which is when we set up shop, as I said, 25 years ago, Hyundai already in here, we began to slowly start unraveling various aspects of this connection. Not necessarily K-pop, but we were looking at both the traditional end of Korean content as well as the more contemporary
Nandini ma'am, we can't hear Rathi ma'am. Nandini ma'am, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, you can. Yes,
Yeah, I think Rathi is, there's no power in our house. She's going to connect it with her phone. Okay.
yes, yes, ma'am. Really.
Okay. Thank you. Kavita, I think we are on.
Yes, ma'am, you're on.
Yeah. Rathi, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. You're not audible, Rathi?
Yeah, we still can't hear Rathi ma'am.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that there was a fluctuation and the current went off here. So this is the travails of the online world. Okay, so where were we? I'll quickly move forward from So Taiji and the team, a sort of 10-year hiatus where work was going on, but not much was being promoted strategically on the world stage. And I'm cutting forward quickly to 2012, where we have Psy and Gangnam Style, which was essentially a huge tipping point in terms of how Korean content traveled like wildfire and caught the world's imagination. Now, Psy, if you look at him, is very antithetical to the sort of image that we have of the fit hero, of the beautiful looking men. who are promoting a certain positive, vibrant, aspirational sort of Korean image. It's quite satirical, actually, his Gangnam Style, and it's a comment on the consumerist culture, which is fast taking hold of what was a very strict and conservative society. So the changes that were happening over there, but what helped him tremendously was the parallel growth by that time in terms of social media platforms and the manner in which something could travel so quickly at the click of a button. So hardly surprising, therefore, that Psy's Gangnam Style was the first to sort of reach 1 billion views and very quickly surpassed all of that and still remains one of the most watched videos, the most aped, the most, enjoyed videos, if you like. And slowly but surely, there was a very strong Korean identity which was being established there. By that time, people knew that he was from Korea. There was lots of references made about what is Gangnam exactly, what does Oppa mean. And you will have this kind of lyrics which are in Korean, which is with a smattering of English coming in, which is soon to become a trend and soon to take over popular imagination. So with the advent of social media and with the ability of groups to share content so easily, there was a tipping point where something which was so local and so locally consumed began to have a much wider audience. We could see that very quickly. The second aspect of my talk today, which is about strategy, it has never been far away from the overall attempt to push Korea forward more generally as an aspirational destination. So everything that you see from there on, whether it is music, whether it is K-dramas, which came on a little later, again, it was hugely popular for local consumption. But gradually, with the entrance of players like Netflix, 2007 onwards, you found that there was actual commissioning of work that was going on for an international audience. From InKo Center's side, as we were presenting work more and more as we visited the performing arts market, for instance, in Seoul, to select work which could be shown in India, it was very evident that there were conscious attempts made for a global circulation of Korean drama or Korean music or Korean arts. For this, you needed to go beyond, let's say, the traditional pansori, or you had to go beyond traditional instrumentation. You had to give some sort of hook for audiences outside to engage with. So I'd like to take an example from Kerala. If you look at the Kathakali tradition, for instance, or you look at Theyyam and the, sort of transformational projects which come in from a sort of a religious, secular background, but also look at a manner in which it is very culturally specific to a certain part of India. So from percussion to shamanistic traditions to certain dance and mask dance forms, there's a lot of overlap and similarity with Korea. But if we were to take a Kathakali performance in its pristine sense to Korea to present to audiences there, your audience would be lost in 5 minutes flat, because unless they understand the kind of local and the sort of deeply entrenched cultural metaphors which are there as part of the presentation, unless we give them some clue. So whether it is subtitles or whether it is some sort of introduction or whether there is a manner in which we can bring in some element to provide that hook, we will lose it. Similarly, on the reverse as well, if we were to bring in Pansori, which is a UNESCO recognized music form, Pansori, which is a combination of a singer and a single drummer. We have that in our Villupattu, for instance, in India. A lot of the content is very satirical, it's very political, it's very local. The humor is very, very local and context specific. How will this travel unless you give them some kind of a hook on which they can base their support system? So therefore, the choice of what we bring out, the choice of what we present becomes really important. And we need to do the research back here as well to see in terms of reception, is the audience ready to receive something like this? I'm just placing this in the larger context of cultural exchange. Coming back to K factor, the strategy clearly employed by the Korean government is how to support the production, first of all, of valuable content, which is very positive in its outcome, which is something that provides hope and aspiration in general and projects Korea as a very progressive, forward-looking nation. So the establishment of huge companies, SM Entertainment, YG Entertainment, JYP Entertainment, Big Media, these are companies which have, through a very rigorous process of audition and then contractually getting groups of people to follow very, very strict rules and practice and choreography and everything else. So they're very conscious of the fact that their content is being consumed visually. So if you go back to the Motown phenomenon, which happened in the 50s and 60s in America, there it was a time of the radio and the phonograph. So the emphasis was on the sound, how eclectic the sound was and how beautiful the compositions were. What was the sort of variations? It's mainly auditory. By the time you come to K-pop reception, we are not looking only at auditory, we are looking also at the visual content of television, of downloadable material, of software and social media sharing. So the strategy is one such that makes it visually appealing. Something there where this sensation travels, whether it's a physical concert or otherwise, it is precise movement, excellent choreography, very high quality production values, beautifully turned out idols, those who emphasize certain attributes. So you have from BTS to others, each member signifies a certain attribute. It could be hope, it could be peace, it could be compassion. All the beautiful positive attitudes are something that is imbibed by these idols and transported and transferred to the armies and to the tons of fans who then take it forward. So the emotive level, the sensorial level is never out of sight. Interesting to note that the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism is an organization behind this reception, behind this production, sorry. They are the ones who are screening, who are supporting, and with support comes a certain level of control as well. So yesterday, again, we had the discussion as to how much of this is about cultural identity, how much of it is about cultural appropriation. So if you go from the days of mimicking the Western models or the kind of jazz and other traditions from African-American soil, how much is it about now Koreanizing this and making it, appropriating it and making it their own? There was a heyday moment where a lot of that was happening with a lot of Korean lyrics, smattering of English, and a very strong take me from my Korean point of view sort of attitude, which came through, which was very refreshing. I think for an Indian audience, it was a particular counterpoint to Western models that were presented to us for the longest time ever. Remember, we have a 200-year-old colonial history and a very troubled relationship with English, a love-hate relationship in terms of how we narrate to it, and still a feeling that we need approbation from these various platforms in the West for us to be accepted and for us to feel somewhat up there and somewhat part of a global team. I think Kerala is a fantastic example of standing on its own in terms of regional cinema or in terms of the various support systems provided by the government. I bring in this example here because, like the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, we have a very progressive attitude in Kerala where there is state support and government support, whether it's the Kochi Biennale or whether the recent Lokama Taravada exhibition which is happening, or look at the regional cinema and the kind of fearless way in which it is a slice of life, very, very close to Korean cinema actually, in terms of a slice of life presented from a particular cultural standpoint. Less so with Bollywood, which is a sort of a mishmash of so much. But having said that, I must still say Bollywood still has its own identity and is still accepted. We are not about to, hopefully not about to, ape the West. We have had many examples of movies which have been made partly in English, partly in the regional language, very much about a city phenomenon which we cannot escape. But hopefully we will hold our own and not get into a stage where we have to pander to a certain Western approbation and change our way of telling altogether. So apart from the establishment of these big companies and support from the Korean government, there have been concerted efforts. I wouldn't say K-pop is the most important thing or the most important phenomenon in terms of the local Korean consumer. They're probably proud of it and the fact that it has, crossed cultures and has become a transnational phenomenon today. But in order for it to hold its own and in order for it to remain something which even is consumed at home more than other locally conceived programs, I think it is very important for it to keep its cultural identity there, at the same time show how that can be proudly presented on a global stage. So the strategic aspect is also very, very important in terms of the economic benefits reaped by the country. So if you look at Netflix, they have about, let's say, about 222 million in terms of subscribers, out of which about 67 million are in the US alone. They had about 3 million about 2 years back in Korea, very recent entry into Korea. And very quickly, in 2 years, it's about 5 million. And Netflix has increased their, as of last year, increased their investment in Korean content to about $500 million, sorry. And this is the largest in terms of investment in terms of the East Pacific area. So what does this mean in terms of both geopolitics as well as the kind of economic boom? Remember that Korea, after the war, had to have a tremendous, difficult period of nation building, rebuilding. After the Asian stock market crash, there was again another dip, heavy borrowing. Beautiful example of how Korean households actually came in to declare and give away their gold in order to save the country and in order to pay back the debt to the World Bank and other global agencies. So a very nationalistic upsurge in terms of bringing the country back to being a major player on the world stage. And here I want to go back, way back to something that our own poet laureate, world poet laureate Rabindranath Tagore had to say in his Lamp of the East about Korea. And he spoke about how from the ashes of war, this country was going to rise and like a lamp, lead Asia. Now, very strangely, a prediction that has come true, has come full circle, and it has established Korea as, again, something which is an aspirational country. Now, K factor with the K-dramas, especially with Netflix, I think there was so much of an introduction to K-dramas. First, in terms of an East Asian platform. So you had Chinese, you had some content from Hong Kong, from various other places, which were taken up and shown, and quite a bit of regurgitating of dramas which were already there. And then you had something like A Crash Landing on You. And then you had something like The Kingdom and various other things which were specifically commissioned and specifically taken up because somewhere in a very prescient sort of way, they were able to find out that here is something that they could latch on to become a global phenomenon. So Netflix, interestingly, has moved from a Hong Kong office to a Seoul office, is very actively sourcing scripts. And the three most important things in terms of any commission seems to be a strong scriptwriter, an excellent cast, and an ability to touch on themes which have a very global connect. So starting with dramas which looked at family, which looked at things which we are also traditionally aware of and comfortable with. So whether it is looking at the system of elders and how does one relate to, what's the hierarchy within society, how do people relate to in terms of family members, etc. to very safe topics and rom-coms and comedies and romance, especially. Romance of a very special kind, which is very family watchable. I mean, there's nothing which makes you squirm in your seat. You can watch it and feel very comfortable in the manner in which girl meets boy. A very slice of life, very happenable girl next door, boy next door kind of stories. But also, interestingly, projecting certain ideas of masculinity and femininity, I think, looking at gender in a very specific manner, looking at a certain androgyny which has come in, which is such a contrast to what we see in terms of the hunky Western superhero. And how has that come to affect fashion on a world stage? How has it brought in an interest in Korean glass cosmetics and this translucent look that they are, emphasizing? How has it brought in a focus on food? We see a lot of food and a lot of eating. I mean, there's a lot of bonding over food. And like in India, where we have local translations of "Have you eaten? Are you comfortable?" It's there in every part of India. One of the first greetings is "Have you eaten?" Or "Would you like to have a meal?" And it's about connecting and showing love and affection through food. We have in our own country, and especially in Kerala, you have strong Ayurvedic traditions, traditional medicine, fermentation techniques. So whether you're looking at cosmetics, you're looking at seasonal connection with food, you're looking at how, as the seasons change, you change your food habits. All of these things are great similarities that we find between Korea and India. And yet, our own Ayurvedic traditions, which are thousands and thousands of years old, has not broken into the market, barring a forest essential or Kama Ayurveda, has not really broken into the world market as something which is very affordable as well as sustainable and very easy on the environment and very, very, very conscientious as far as the environment goes. Now, is this because of a lack of marketing? I think, again, Kerala is streets ahead in terms of talking about Ayurveda, in talking about tourism potential. I mean, barring the pandemic, which has been a hard hit, there have been so many packages which has focused on rejuvenation and health and well-being, that being your central kind of focus beyond anything else. So the move from strategy to soft power is a step away, really, because as I said, over a process of accretion, gradually you begin to associate Korean products, by extension, the country, the people, with something which is positive and aspirational. We have in InKo Center noticed an exponential increase of people who want to learn the language. Earlier, it was because they found employment in Korean companies. Now, if you ask the average student, they would say, it's because I want to know what my favorite idol is singing or saying. I want to follow K-drama. I want to look at opportunities of connecting and maybe auditioning even, don't know, of going and studying in Korea, of becoming translators, interpreters, of internalizing this language and making it my own. We often have students who, when we meet them, they are anayaseo, they are bowing, they are responding to us in a manner in which we have to say, you look and sound almost Korean. And that to them is a huge, huge compliment. But we always tell them, remember, this is the InKo Center. So therefore, it's the Indian part of it is equally important to the Korean part of it. Engage with it and please connect with it, discover it, but also make that a reflective process where you look at your own culture and your own standing. And I think that is a very important aspect of soft power, because soft power is not about coercion. It is about consent. It is not about you trying to forcefully change somebody, but it is suggestopedia there, where you are gradually changing hearts and minds for people to say, I appreciate that. And by appreciating something which is in the ephemeral cultural sphere, you may go on dotted line towards taking on a Korean product. So brand building, whether it is for companies or whether it's for the country, comes from your ability to have positive associations with that particular country. So that's what we've experienced, and all our partner supporting companies have experienced over the years, where anything Korean, and this, you can contest it and say, isn't this a bit in a bubble, in a sense, that you're not looking at the negative aspects of it? Of course, there are negative aspects. There are aspects, as I said, of cultural appropriation. there are aspects of losing your identity. I mean, today BTS is singing more in English than in Korean. Butter, if you look at Butter or Dynamite, it's completely different from what they were doing earlier. Now, is this to continue gaining legitimacy and acceptance in in the West? Or are we strong enough now to say that Asia has come into its own? I think India is in a very unique position where between the West and the East, only very recently we've had a look East policy and an act East policy, which is actively embedded in government documentation and approach. So at last, perhaps, we on an Asian grid are feeling confident enough. If you read people like Sai Deepak, who had this fantastic argument with Shashi Tharoor, talking about a re-acceptance of our own history from our own perspective. If you read Oceans of Churn by Sanjeev Sanyal, for instance, what has the Indian Ocean done in terms of, what has it witnessed in terms of historical currents and movements? And how has so much of that not been written into history books because we had a Western mediation happening? So I think we're coming into a position of, I wouldn't say position of power, but a position of reclaiming our history and looking at our Asian neighbors, looking at this Asian grid and trying to make sense of where we are on this journey of interculturality. I don't think when we are journeying interculturally that we need to give up our own position. We can refresh our own position, we can understand a counter position, and therefore we can look at it. And therefore I would like to say that I don't think this is the K-factor element in all its entirety, whether it is drama, music, the performing visual arts, language, cosmetics, fashion, food, whatever it may be. I don't think it is something which is going to be a flash in the pan. It is going to remain, but it is definitely going to morph. It is definitely going to change as our deliberations and as our engagement changes, as the geopolitics of the area changes, as the political and economic interconnections change. This is going to change as well. But it's very important that culture follows close behind. Otherwise, it becomes a very void interaction, becomes a very commercial interaction. So for us to come back full circle to a sensorial connect, an emotive connect, which allows us to bring in the greatest power equations, the most respectful way of engaging with diverse cultures. So I want to leave it at that now. And I would like to open up to the floor for discussions and then on to our panel discussion as well. And for any questions you might have. We've got a short video, which is basically what we're doing. Do we have time for that, Kavita?
Kavita?
Do we have time for the video? Otherwise, we can go straight into questions. I'm aware that it's about 11 o'clock now.
No, ma'am. You first.
Should we go to the questions straight off?
We can probably take the questions in
sure.
the panel discussion probably. We'll show the video.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. So any questions, any observations?
Take the video and then come back to questions.
Okay, sure. So this is a very short video, a generic film.
Sorry, ma'am.
북천이 말타코늘 우장 없이 길을 나니 사한된 난 눈이
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was just a quick snapshot of what we're all about. And it was in 1920. It stopped at 1920. 2021, we've been doing a lot of work online with a magazine called Click. It's an e-digest. I shall quickly get your coordinators onto our list as well and send it out to you so you can share it with your students, access it from wherever you are. Okay, on to questions if you have anything to say.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Jyoti from the department. It's been a wonderful move from, say, a sensation through strategy to soft power, and it's been very engaging. And I would say it just gave us a holistic experience of the entire K factor, I would say. And my question is, what are the efforts done by the InKo Center to bring in literature of these two countries together? Being a literature enthusiast,
Right.
I just asked that question.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we at the moment have a program along with the Arts Council of Korea, supported by Arts Council Korea, and Sangam House, which is a residency space in Bangalore. We select, with the help of Sangam House, Indian writers to go to Korea and Korean writers to come here in residence. They are in residence for 4 weeks and working on a project for which coming into the country becomes important. So it can be either for library research or to, interview people, whatever it may be. So on the basis of merit, these selections are made. So it's really only, it's not a huge number of people traveling back and forth, but over the years, there has been over 25, 30 people on either side who've come. So it's a network which is gradually emerging. And one of the things we find is really important with residencies is when there is a project which allows for collaboration, let's say whether it is jointly writing or whether it's to do with costumes or it's to do with lighting or it's to do with installation. These residencies give us a network of people who are already inclined to that sort of collaborative work. And they become our first stop, really, in terms of when we engage with them. So, for instance, we did a fabulous project with Astad Debu, unfortunately no more, Astad Debu, the dancer. And we had Parvati, who's based in Kerala, from Baul tradition. And we were working with a Korean director who was looking at Hamlet. So this is called Hamlet Avatar. And it was a beautiful interpretation from a very Korean and Indian point of view of relating to the predicament of the central character, to the, you know, the ghost coming in, and what does that mean? How do we bring in the Baul tradition to do things like that, etc.? I'm just giving you an example. But as far as literature is concerned, at the moment, this is the solid program that is happening. But we also look at ways in which we can bring literature translation. So there are books which have been translated. So Please Look After My Mom, which is a very famous one, which was found all over the world. The Vegetarian, for instance, you know, things like this, where if we can lay hold of the translations, we try and make sure that that is then shared with the public. With the literature residency program, we also bring out a multilingual anthology. So we will send you the first 3 volumes of it for your library. You can share it. So if the writer is writing in a regional language, we have the regional language and English translation, or the Korean language and the English. So it's an interesting sort of a. So having said that, it has been quite difficult to push forward more generally in terms of solely literature agenda, simply because of the language divide. So we're trying our best now with there's an organization called KLTI, the Korean Literature Translation Institute. So Nandini was telling me just this morning that one of our students have now got selected to go there for a 2-year stint to work on translation. So we've been working with them for many years now. And we're trying to see how many of our books also can realistically get into their libraries. So on the commercial aspect of it, there is a publisher called Tara Publishers, based in Chennai, and Tulika and Tara. We have supported them in various ways to get some of their books translated into Korean, and vice versa. So Tara has been very successful in having a number of their children's books translated and available in Korean. And similarly, they have taken some of the Korean titles also and brought it into India. So it's a very, very slow process and early days yet. But we really hope it will go on. And I hope this seminar will lead to more interest in this area, more research. We had a student from Korea University who actually did a small paper on Korean literature. So she looked at Indian books and Korean books and did a kind of comparative study. And that was very interesting, because rather than just K-pop and, this area, which has got a lot of visibility, Korean literature is also extremely important, now becoming more so, because the writers are also increasingly dealing with very, what was earlier seen as contentious topics. So whether it's mental health, whether it's to do with this feeling of oppression, whether it is about the hierarchy in Korean society, a lot of which was not spoken about in the public domain earlier, is now getting a lot of traction. So we hope that we'll see more of that in the future.
And some Hindi movies have been made also, no, like on Korean themes.
Oh, yes.
And early part of 20th century, I think.
Yes. I mean, for the longest time ever, it was Rajesh Khanna's Andaz, which was a recognizable movie, more because of the elephant than anything else. You know, so I mean, we were shocked when we first went in 2006-07, and people were still not aware of Bollywood, unlike Japan, for instance, who even had a huge recall for Rajnikant. There was no such recognition in Korea before. But now, with movies now being screened in public spaces, so from Black to Three Idiots to, you know, various other things, movies which are, again, as I said, you know, the movies from Kerala, regional movies, there's a lot of overlap in the sort of narrative techniques, in the sort of slice of life, very sparse storytelling, very happenable plots. You know, you're not suddenly jetting off to somewhere and, you know, singing in the rain or singing in the snow. You know, you've got very realistic kind of themes coming in, which is very similar to regional cinema, much more than Bollywood, you know. But the other thing is, there is a company in Chennai which has done, it's called Real Image Technologies, So they have done, in fact, we helped them for their pitch. They wanted it translated into Korean. And they have got the contract for cube technology in several Korean theaters. And so many of Indian productions now being shown, as I said, mainstream theaters where it is shown, on television shown. There are now ZTV, another thing is also a channel in Korea that you can access and see. So I think slowly it's happening, where from a complete zero recognition of a country that arguably produces the most amount of cinema, today there is a recognition of sorts. And a lot of people relate to the escapism which is part and parcel of Bollywood, I think, to singing and dancing in the street kind of thing. So you'll very often have, when we have Korean artists across as well, they will have a smattering of a line which they will bring into their performance. And that's a beautiful link. So if they're playing in Kerala, they will sing a Malayalam song, maybe Jimiki Kamal or something, And then you go to go somewhere else and they will bring in that element quite deliberately, quite strategically, for you to say, wow, you took the effort to learn my language. Now I'll relate to yours.
Sona or Raju had raised your hand. You may ask your question to Rathi ma'am. Sona Raju. Sona Raju, you raised your hand to ask a question. Rathi ma'am, do you require a break or can you state it for panel discussion? I guess you might be requiring 5 minutes break.
I'm okay actually, but if you want a break, it's fine. I'm
No,
quite
we
okay.
don't want.
I've got my water here. It's
Okay, okay, ma'am. Then we can straight go for that. We
Yeah.
just
So, we were listening to the thoughts of Dr. Rathi Jafer on K culture and world economy. Also, the observations of how the cultures blend through visually engaging media with explications were also very interesting. I believe that we got a third dimension of K culture, and it will be very beneficial for the K culture learners and enthusiasts. How beautifully she talked or traced the trajectory of market, its constructions, its implications, food, performance, gender, cosmetics, and whatnot. And we go to listen that directly from the director of InKo Center, Chennai. Thank you so much, Dr. Rathi Jafer,
You're welcome.
for that enlightening session.
You're welcome.
So now I think we shall move to the next session, which is the panel discussion. Also, I think I should thank Nandini ma'am because
Jitin, you're not audible.
not audible. Okay, yeah. So thank you, Nandini ma'am, for that. And now we go to the panel discussion. Rathi ma'am, Nandini ma'am will be with us. And I would like to invite the moderator of the panel discussion, our most beloved Vice Principal, Dr. Jyothimol, who is a writer, a translator, and whatnot. I think this panel discussion, or she's here to make this discursive space more dynamic and dialogic, I should say. And let me welcome Dr. Jyothimol P as the moderator of the session.
Thank you, dear Jibin. And it has been a wonderful day, I would say, because I think when we began our international seminar or the thoughts of it, we looked at Hallyu from a very monologic perspective. Our beginning was like that because, as you said, we began with the BTS or the Blink or, it was just the visibility or whatever was visible that mattered. Now, as we move into day 2, through day 1, I would say it is like a labyrinth. Lot of hitherto unseen elements are coming out, and I think this panel discussion, where we will be probably the millennial, the Gen X, and the Gen Zs would talk, it would throw more light on this multifaceted aspect of Hallyu. And I would take the cue from Dr. Rathi's talk, like we began with an intention to discover that we are engaging with it. And I hope when we disconnect, it will be on a very connecting note. And I hope to, this should throw light on more and more aspects of this holistic phenomenon called Hallyu, which is not only taken us through the sensational and the sensory and the sensuous, but it has engaged the economic, political, cultural, hegemonic, and a lot other more. So I am not trying to waste a lot of time on introduction. And the second day of international seminar and second keynote is over. On to the panel discussion in connection with Korean waves on the Indian shores in collaboration with MG University Kerala and InKo Center Chennai. Now let me introduce the panelists. Dr. Rathi Jafer, as you've seen, is the director of InKo Center. Mr. Jibin George, journalist at Malayalam Manorama, a leading daily of Kerala. He's a media person who would represent the media aspect on how they pursue Hallyu. Milin Mary Mathew, the youngest participant, is a political and cultural critic. We had put her as the cultural enthusiast, and she very clearly said it is not just enthusiast, she's a cultural critic. Then we have a number of Baselian enthusiasts here. Arah, Shibu, George. Arah, hello. Sona Varghese and Anakha S. Thampy. I hope they have all joined. Yes, Sona.
Hi, ma'am.
Anakha. It's okay.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi. So I think the stage for the panel discussion is all set. And the topic that we have been putting across is Hallyu and the millennials. We have not specified whether it is the Indian millennials or across the world. And I think we could all take our own take on the issue. And the panel has to talk about the impact of Hallyu on the millennials. And I think I mentioned about the combination of the panel. It is not just the millennial who is talking here. I rather belong to the other side of millennial. I'm a Gen X person. And sometimes my children call me boomer, but so I don't know like how it is going to take. And the ones who have been bewitched by the K-pop is the Gen Zs. So I think it is a very, very curious and a very beautiful collection of generations coming together to talk on an issue which has taken us by storm, in a very soft storm, I would say. So that's why we've been using the term soft power. So I think now to state the problem, I would say, for me, I think for millennials, this is a very ambivalent position. with regard to the Hallyu, especially what they perceive as the Hallyu. I use a Samsung phone. So many of my family also go for the Samsung or anything. Then we have there is a use of Hyundai car, and there is an all-perceiving technological grasp of Korea on us, on our daily lives. With everything technological at home being used, being selected for its Korean preference. But at the same time, when our children kind of create a little Korea in our own homes, listening to BTS or Blink, coloring their hair and trying to create a layering of aestheticism on them, we might have a different opinion. So I think that's why I said the kind of take of could be ambivalent. A millennial is, for the information of those who've been listening, it could be a millennial is anyone born after, say, 95, roughly 95 to and later. No, 80 to 95. The last part of 80 to 2000 is a millennial. Post 2000 is a Gen Z, and pre 1980s, from 1965 to 1980, is Gen X, and pre 1965 is the boomer. So I suppose now that the generations are clearly set, I hope. Now let's probably ask Dr. Rathi, how do you approach this K-Fair? What do you think is the impact? Because you've been studying it in a very close manner. You've been very close with this phenomenon and how it slowly trickled and took the country. And how do you think the attitude of the millennial or the impact of this on the millennial is?
Thank you for setting the tone. That's really interesting, and I look forward to this discussion. Dare I say, I'm probably at the boomer end of things as well, but trying to understand how this has impacted a millennial generation is absolutely fascinating. For one, I think this is a generation which is extremely comfortable with technology. They are so comfortable in the sense that everything happens with a click of a button, and the phone becomes, I think, your first point of consumption. We are very conscious of that when we are doing a lot of online programming, because you've got to catch their attention right there, otherwise it's lost. There is a tendency, almost a natural tendency, to share and to promote, and the pressures therewith is also to be understood, because there is that question of getting your likes and your question of being noticed and your question of being, which is leading to all kinds of various elements of stress at different levels. But it is a world which is fast becoming a kind of a parallel universe almost. I look at this, some of these dystopian fiction which is now coming up, becoming big in terms of Black Mirror type of episodes, where you have almost a kind of parallel universe where all of this is happening. I mean, this is all very real to them. There may be somebody who is singing in South Korea, singing somewhere else. It may be a reality, a kind of AI driven show, but still there is a community here who is actively talking about it, promoting it, and not just promoting it. It is something that is appealing to their own personal lives. I mean, we've had students telling us that sometimes they are not able to talk about their difficulties to their parents or their peers, but somebody from BTS or EXO or Blackpink is actually singing directly to them and is directly linking. I can see Milin smiling over there, so I'm sure she's going to come in to say, yes, I relate to that. Because we've had students actually telling us this. I mean, so and so denotes hope. In my lowest mood, I was able to relate to them, and they'll speak about it with such passionate intensity. There's something very pure about this in the manner in which this is happening. Okay. At the same time, I notice that sometimes there is a tendency for millennials to sort of ape or mimic to such an extent that they lose their cultural roots. and they become this some other person, whether it's by mannerisms, whether it's the food they eat. We've got a whole set of students who will only eat with chopsticks,
Yes.
and they would love to have tapoki, and they would like to have kimbap and whatever else and whatever else. They would know more about Korean cooking than perhaps their own cuisines. No fault, no problem. But again, I think this is the question of where do we stay rooted, like a tree almost, where do we stay rooted, but still branch out and embrace all that's global? So I'd like to hear from the youngsters here on the panel as well, as to whether we on the other side have got it right to say that you guys are definitely sensorially connected, you are emotionally invested in this. But how much do you hold your own to say, yes, that is another kind of thing which appeals to me, but not lose your identity in the process and become so Korean-like? I was teasing a colleague of mine recently when she was greeting me, and I said, "Gosh, for a second, I don't know whether you're Korean or Indian." We have a colleague who's from Nagaland who sometimes says, "Oh, in India, do you do this?" And I have to stop her to say, "You are from Nagaland, which is India," kind of thing. And so this is not intentional. This is something which I suppose when you relate to it so much, all of us have gone through our fan moments when we were younger as well. It could be film stars, it could be music idols or
Yes.
whoever. We didn't have this advantage of, this kind of overpowering presence of social media, which all the time, every time is there. I open it up and, now you have this strange and terrifying almost phenomenon that if I do a search on BTS, the next time I open my phone, there will be a zillion things about BTS that comes in. I mean, it's like AI listening into you and saying, okay, this is what this person wants. Let's feed them enough of that. So as we move to a metaverse universe, it is really quite scary. How are we going to hold our own? What is it that we are going to accept? What is it that we are going to allow to influence us? So tremendous as influencers. I think the K factor element as influencers have topped it. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Let's hear what the younger people have to say on this. Arah.
Thank you, Dr. Rathi. And it was like, millennial is partly, they were a generation who had listened to, I would say, the pop and the rap from the Hollywood side also. So there is this kind of cord between the other and this, and for them it is like deciding to go into the new world, which is more Eastern, softer, etc. So that's the kind of thing. And now we have, I think we'll move on to welcome Jibin George, who's also, I would say, a millennial media person. And I would like to, for the panel, can you just speak about your experience as a media person, as a millennial, and your take on the Hallyu and the lure of it?
Am I audible?
Very, very much.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. This is such a great, this is the first time I'm in a panel discussion, and this is quite interesting too. And the topic is really interesting. Thank you so much for inviting me. As a media person, I would say, the media nowadays are really interested in the Korean aspects, whether it's K-pop or K-drama. It's mainly because of our, the Indian people are really interested in watching K-pop and K-drama. So they really want to know what the stars are doing right now. So when they really want to know, they are like searching for, the questions. What is happening in the K world? So we are also forced to give information about the stars in the media platforms. And it's not only, it's at first I was in the thought process that it was happening just, in the main cities and all. But later on, I identified that in Kerala also, people are really interested in identifying what is happening in the K world. And it's a real struggle too for the media people, because as we all know that the latest event was like the BTS members getting COVID and all, and all the Indian fans were really upset, and they really wanted to know how their health is doing, what is happening in their life and all. And so the media were really forced to follow the BTS for more information. So yeah, the media platforms in India too are really focusing on the K world right now. So it's quite interesting.
Thank you, Jibin. But as a millennial, how will you look at it? Are you a fan? That's my question. Not only
Well,
BTS, but generally the Korean wave, the use
okay.
of the gadgets and such things.
Well, I would say I don't call myself as a true fan, but I'm really interested in Korean culture too, and that's why I'm following it. Well, I started watching the K dramas. It's just because I think most people from India started falling for the K dramas and the K-pop during the lockdown days. I would say the uprising was during the lockdown period, and people were really, searching for more options in the OTT platforms, and they were receiving Korean dramas, and Korean dramas have this attractive power where once you watch a good series, you will be like hooked onto it, and you will be like following for more. And that was the case with me too. During the lockdown days, I started watching one K drama, and then it moved on, and still I'm watching K dramas too. And that's the same case with K-pop too. In K-pop, I would say it has a charm of its own. Even though you don't know the language, you don't know the lyrics and all, what you don't know the meaning of the words or anything like that, but people are really, really, really fascinated by I could say it could be the tune, it could be the whole thematic experience that it is providing you. So it's kind of new, but it's kind of fresh for the people too. It's not the same thing that you see every time. That's the same case with K dramas too. You are getting an umpteen number of options. In thematic way, you have the typical romance series, you have the sci-fi, you have the horror mode, you have the comedy genre. Everything is available in the K dramas too. So this is something that is served as fresh for the audience. It's not something that you always see. Every time you're getting something new. So I think that could be one reason for the people's interest in Korean dramas and K-pop. And one other reason could be the involvement of social media. People are really, social media connects people from all over the world, and they are really interested in, and all the K stars also have this kind of um, social media platforms too. And as you all know, I'm also quoting BTS because that's one group that we follow a lot. The BTS started following in Instagram. It was a great what should I say, a kind of shock to all the media platforms when the seven members joined in Instagram, and they were started getting followers like 20 million or above, so in one day. So it was like, the fans are really following everything what is happening in their stars life and all. So medias are really focusing on it too. And being a millennial, I would say, the millennials are a part of the K group, but I would say more the Gen Zs are really interested in the K world, because I can see small children and all singing Blackpink songs, imitating Lisa and Rose. I have seen children doing singing songs like "How You Like That," for us and all. So it's kind of, we have the Gen Zs, we have the millennials, mostly in the K world. I think it's mainly because of the involvement of social media. The social media, basically, these two groups are the main ones who are using the entire platforms of social media, and that could be one reason that people are really following it. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, Jibin. Now, I think
Thank you.
let's move to Mary Mathew, who's a cultural critic, I would say. And Milin is a student, a plus two student. And she has her own ideas about the K culture. So, Milin, it is your turn to speak about how you perceive the impact of Hallyu on.
Am I audible?
Yeah, very much.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be here and to talk about my views. This is a great pleasure and honor for me. I must confess that I don't intend to hurt feelings or offend any Korean media enthusiast here. My intention is merely to put forth my views on the reception of Hallyu Wave by millennials from a Gen Z perspective. I think I should begin by explaining my background. I was born and raised in a household that worshipped Western media. And I have seen a lot of millennials. My household was dominated by millennials. All my cousins, a lot of my friends are all millennials. And in my experience, I have seen that a major number of millennials expressed lack of interest towards Korean media. They are not really interested in watching Korean dramas, let it be romance, fiction, non-fiction, or any other genre. They don't seem to be really interested in going to BTS concerts or fan meets. They don't seem to be aware of the 7 or 8 step beauty care routine. One might actually question if there is any media that interests them. Of course, there is, and it is Western media. In my experience, I have seen more millennials who are way more interested in Western media than Korean or any other media. If we take a look at the teenage era of millennials, we find that circumstances were clearly different for them. Imagine living with 3 GB of data for a month. That is how millennials spent their teenage era in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. They are the generation that waited in anticipation for music cassettes of the king of pop, Michael Jackson, the queen of pop, Madonna, and princess of pop, Britney Spears. They are the generation that grew up with Harry Potter, who are attached to American sitcoms like Friends, How I Met Your Mother, and Simpsons. They are the generation that dreamt of living in the United States and the Western countries or go to Michael Jackson concerts. So their teenage set up their interest towards Western media, which might be one of the reasons of resistance towards Korean media or Hallyu. I know that a lot of Gen Z nowadays want to go to Seoul, want to go to Busan, Incheon, South Korea, they want to eat kimchi. Likewise, millennials wanted to go to New York, they wanted to go to Boston, they want to visit Times Square, Central Park, they want to eat pizza. Circumstances were clearly different. If we put it in a simple way, Western media for millennials is what K media is for Gen Z. The second reason I think that creates a lack of interest is the content of K media. For instance, Gen Z love the K-pop band BTS for their campaigns on mental health, which is more crucial and important for Gen Z and popular among them. The third reason is Gen Z and millennials are different. Millennials right now have responsibilities. They have family to take care of. They have jobs to attend. As per Gen Z, they have a lot of free time to invest and explore more about K-media through social media platforms, which is clearly an advantage. However, I have observed a special reason for resistance towards Korean media by millennials who are Indian, and this reason is somewhat entangled with patriotism. As we all know, the India-China relation or the Indo-Sino relation haven't been really stable in the recent years. This disruption has somehow negatively impacted Korean media merely for being an East Asian country that produces actresses, models, and actors who share the same facial structure as that of Chinese. This has actually prompted not only millennials, but also boomers, Gen X, and Gen Z to boycott K-media as a whole. As for me, I am basically a millennial in a Gen Z body who pay equal attention to all media, including Thai, Taiwanese, English, Western, and Korean. Though I take a stand that Indian millennials resist K-media, this might change in the recent years as K-media is bringing up new contents which attract them, like Squid Game. So this shift in contents might actually interest millennials more to get invested and interested in K-media in the future years. That is for certain. So that is my opinion about Indian millennials and the Hallyu.
Thank you, Milin, for that very different view. Because, and I think your millennials at home are influencing you a lot.
Of course.
Yeah. So now I think we have Sona and Anakha and Arah. They are opening up their, I would say, just opening their videos to just talk about the the consent of or appreciation of the, uh, I would say, the Hallyu, because they are termed as the Korean enthusiasts of Baselius College. So let me call upon Sona Varghese, and let's hear what she has to say about her love for the Hallyu. And you could also speak about how you came into contact with it and what are the aspects which you appreciate.
First of all, hello everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I first got into K-pop through TikTok. Now TikTok is banned, yeah. But I first got into K-pop because of TikTok. I saw some of the videos and I got interested because so many people were commenting about it, talking about it, and everybody was liking it. So I looked up and I found BTS and I learned their names quickly and I watched the music videos and I liked them. And about K dramas, I wanted to pass time because of the pandemic, and then I started watching K dramas. That's how I fell in love with K dramas. I think the major reason why millennials or Gen Z is loving K-pop or K-drama is the content. Because I recently watched a drama called Love Revolution, and it was based on a high school concept, and I could relate more with the high school drama made in Korea than that's made in India. When we watch the high school dramas made in India, it's not that relatable because they show another perspective that's that we usually don't see in India. But if you look at that particular drama, Love Relation, we can see that it's kind of relatable. So I think one of the major reasons is the relatability of the content, and also, as Milin just said, the focus on mental health, women empowerment, issues like that. So I think they're influencing us in a really good way. And I think it's some of their concepts and some of their songs are just beautiful. And the aesthetics, if you look at the particular aesthetics, K-pop has a different aesthetics and Western songs. And if you particularly look at Western songs, it's more about, talking about, it doesn't have any particular content, if you ask me. It's just songs, the melody is good, people are loving it. But if you look at the lyrics, there is no particular meaning or anything like that. But if you look at K-pop songs, even if it's a colorful song, if you look at the lyrics, it has a much deeper meaning to it. I think that's something that made us fall in love with the Korean media. And yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about this.
Thank you, Sona. I think so many people would fall for the soulful quality of the K-pop. It seems they are opening up, and I also found them sharing their realness. Of being like you, their real life recording sessions and how they go wrong, and then how they correct it, so that an average person, whether it is a Gen Z or a millennial who is struggling to build up life, feels that okay, somebody who's struggling like us. And then when Suga shared his own issues during the pandemic, those who were actually closeted in their homes with a non-understanding boomer or Gen X generation could relate to them because of the kind of channels which they use, and the music is soulful in spite of whatever visual aesthetics they bring in it. There is some kind of heart-to-heart quality. It is like they are talking to you.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
yeah.
They put out so much relatable content like this, show their real self to us. So that makes us think that if an idol can show his or her real self to us, why can't we do that? You should have that confidence in yourself. For me personally, I was a shy introverted person. I'm still a shy person, and I still panic when I have to talk like this. But I think K-pop gave me a certain level of confidence to talk. And I think that made a big influence in my life. So yeah, I think them showing their real selves unapologetically, I think that has influenced a lot of us, made us confident actually.
Okay, the unapologetic revelation of the self, which kind of appeals to a lot of people who doesn't dare to look within. I think that has appealed to a lot of people. Now let's thank you, Sona. Now let's listen to what Anakha has to speak about it.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, it's a great honor to be sharing a platform with so many entitled people and enthusiasts. And let me just begin by saying that I am not a very, I wouldn't say I'm a true fan of Korean culture, but I would say when compared to my sister who's at my home, she, like described by Jyothimol at the beginning, she has created a small Korea inside my home. And it's often complained by my mom for she's doing that, she's doing this, she's keeping her WhatsApp profile picture of some Korean people, and she's very irritated about that. But I actually laugh about the fact, and she's the one who's actually shown me, and she's the one who's shown me the Korean culture and how relatable it is to Indian culture. And she's a seventh grader, but she knows everything, every single release, all the number of views, number of likes that each BTS videos get on YouTube. And her over enthusiasm is the reason why I'm sitting here, because I got to know, I got interest in coming to know about what actually the Korean culture is. And I've heard her say that being a very being starting a new teenage life, she was able to relate, and she was able to have a heart-to-heart connection with the BTS or the musical ideals that she is saying. Like, for example, things that she can't share with her family being a teenager is something like Rathi ma'am said in the beginning, like those lyrics or those dramas or movies or contents that she is a message for her. Like Sona said, it's an influence for the millennials. I believe this rooting towards or this influence that is created by these people are because of the beyond what economical and social benefits that people are criticizing about, is this connection that people or especially the millennials are getting from this Korean culture. And Korea has evolved, or the Korean culture and the influence in India has evolved from just being Hyundai, Samsung, Kia to 2012. We had Gangnam Style became a viral video. From that to now, we're standing at BTS and K-pop and all that. And if that has come to us so much of extent, it's beyond just economical benefit or a soft power or a hegemony that Korea is putting forward. It is more of an influence that is in the mindset of the people, I believe, and especially in the millennials. If it is affecting, if I'm not, I mean, I wouldn't move into a criticizing part, because if it's affecting or if it's influencing the people in a good way, I think it should continue unless and until the children do not stay rooted to their own culture, and branching out for an exposure is completely fine in that case, I believe. And that's my take on this topic.
Thank you, Anakha. She's actually a political science student. So you could also talk about how you look at this influence in I mean, as a cultural hegemony probably, and how there is the bilateral relations. How do you think it will affect the relations between India and Korea?
Like coming to that aspect, I've been talking about an emotional aspect. From a political perspective, it's like I've described it before, it's a soft power because it has economically benefited Korea a lot, especially in the entertainment field. Bringing a lot of economical benefits to the country, and it's a cultural exchange. Like for example, if we take the hegemony of US, if we are being able to wear, many of us in the platform are sitting wearing jeans and top, which is completely out of our climatic condition or adaptation to our own country. If we are being able to influence, being influenced by a country like that, similarly, Korea is also an example very similar to this. But from a different perspective. But I think it's if it's asking if it's a bad influence, I wouldn't say it's a bad influence, because is it going to uproot our own culture, and is it going to replace our heretic or the old culture of India, the the basic culture or the basic foundation of India? Is it going to uproot that? The question is, I don't think so. It's very relevant, because India itself has a culture which is very what acceptable or adapting to different exposures. We have people talking different languages, different sharing different religions. We have people in the same platform sitting with different ideologies. If we are able to accept all this into one nation, sitting from various states and all that, if that's possible, I don't think so an exposure to a country like Korea wouldn't matter a lot, even if it's in a political perspective.
Thank you, Anakha, for that very different perspective. And I think there is a kind of subtle, as ma'am said earlier, there's a subtle satire on American influence which came in the wake of Korea. And yesterday, I think Dr. Kim referred to the Americanization of, of a post-war Korea. And so there is a lot of resistance. So probably you could look at Hallyu as a kind of resistance against, using a global to promote the local. So that's, I think it's a very positive thing in a way, if a country can softly influence another. So we are not even talking about its Indian influence. We are looking at how the millennials would take it. And now Arah George can talk about your introduction to Hallyu and how you look at it, or in your family.
Hi everyone, my name is Arah Shibu George, and in my experience, I first came across the K-pop during the pandemic days, and when I first listened to my first BTS songs, I wasn't that invested in those songs. Like, I didn't understand the language, but I liked the tune and the music of those songs, so I, went down this rabbit hole of K-pop songs and K-dramas, and I think the reason why people like it very much is because it's very relatable to our Indian culture. Like, for example, like in K-dramas, they have like in Korea, they have a custom of removing your shoes before entering a house. Like, it's very relatable to us Indians. So I think that's the reason why everyone can have a personal connection with this K-pop and K-drama and all. And when it comes to K-pop, it's not just about the music. Like, if you look into the lyrics, if you take the time to look into the lyrics, you can see that they have a really powerful message in every K-pop songs, like love yourself and all. And those are very powerful messages that they give. And in my family, I'm the only one who listens to K-pop. My brother, he just likes to listen to like the Indian, like not the Indian, the English songs that BTS creates, and it's in if you look at the millennials, they are not that much invested in the K-pop industry, mainly because their peer groups may not allow them to get um, you know interested in this. Like in my personal experience, I didn't listen to the K-pop music till when I was, like I said, during the pandemic period, because I wasn't connected to anyone. I was first introduced to this when I was in seventh grade, I think, to the K-pop, but I couldn't listen to them because my friends were all against them. So I didn't want to be the odd one out and come out and say like, I like these songs and they have a meaningful message. If I did, I wouldn't be part of their group. So I couldn't listen to those songs during that period, and it was during the pandemic period that I was able to listen to these songs, and you know because we all have plenty of time, and there wasn't enough much to do, and I have almost finished watching all the English movies, and there wasn't much to do for me, so I started listening to K-pop and K-dramas and all. So that's my personal experience with K-pop.
Thank you, Arah. That's exactly why I said millennials have a very ambivalent take on it. Those who are they could be all Hindi pop, Hindi songs. Blind admirers of Hindi songs on one side, because this millennial population is comprised of a multiple group. On one side, they'll be falling for their native language songs, or Hindi or English, and now it is that part which is moved into become the admirers of Korean songs. But Gen Zs are already open to an existing phenomenon, and I think that is what makes it very interesting, because what I have seen, my family is settled in a village in Kerala, and I have relatives and their children who attend the local small schools, and I have seen boomers, that is their grandmothers, using their pension to buy chopsticks for this small children who are in school, say 9th standard, 10th standards, etc. And the Gen X is against it. The Gen X says, why should you, if you want to have the rice porridge, you can have a spoon or whatever, the leaf or whatever. So what is the use of a chopsticks in this food? But the boomer wants to connect to the Gen Z. So that is the connection. And the boomers appreciate the song, which is played through the Gen Z. So, and there is this generation, the Y and X, in an ambivalent kind of mode, whether to consent or to have a very, a kind of antithetical outlook. And I have seen the boomer Gen Z combination probably succeed in some of the Kerala households, I would say. I mean, like, this is a very typical Kerala perspective. And it is very different. There are people who have made Korea in their homes. Like, they have their hair cut in a particular way, and they order all these cosmetics. And the Amazon person would deliver things which the middle generation do not understand. So I suppose these are the various levels of impact with which a millennial has to grapple, I think. It is not only appreciating the technological possibility which Korea offers them, because it actually intersects them in every part of their life. Like, when you get out, you have all the gadgets, which is Korean. And on the road, you come across a lot of gadgets, like vehicles, which are Korean mode. And at home, we have Korean citizens who look like Indians, but their entire cultural makeup is Korean. So there is a level, and Arah and Milin had shown another aspect of what a millennial is all about. So I think this is turning out interesting, and probably in another round, we could talk about the next aspect of it. Like, as ma'am already said about it, the InKo. So we have seen how Korean impacts the millennial in India, but how the Indian exchange is possible. Like, is there any way in which we can think about it? Because we spoke about cultural exchange. So when there is this exchange, it is a give and take. So what are the ways in which both as Gen Zs, pro Hallyu, ambivalent Hallyu, and those who are, the intellectual part of it, how are we working for this cultural exchange? Dr. Rathi, ma'am, can you just throw light on that part of it? Like, is there any way in which we can promote to a different, because, you've done it beautifully. That's why I'm just...
Thank you. I think that's an ongoing project, really, as far as we are concerned, because it's very much, as I said, about as we encounter difference, I think there are ways in which we react to that. We immediately begin to introspect and look at sort of points of reference from our own familiar sphere, our own upbringing, our own sort of cultural rootedness. quite often we all find that when we are out of our country, whether for education or for something else, you go out, that's when you are able to have the necessary distance to see what you have been doing or what your forefathers have kind of ingrained in you. It's been so, you're so seeped in it while you're within the country that you don't realize it so much. But when you go out, you realize, oh, that's why I did this, or this is why I had a particular food in summer and not so much in winter. This is what I did when I was oiling my hair. This is a particular hibiscus, whatever thing that I was using. Neela Bringadi is what I was using because it was amazing for me at that point in time. I don't get it outside, so I use Kerastase or whatever else is available in the market. Okay, so my thing is, I think it's the understanding and negotiating difference is a very important aspect of this intercultural dialogue. And when you see something as distinctly different, I don't relate to it at all. It may be a generational thing, but sometimes, I've had, for instance, many people ringing me during the pandemic, not any way related to any generation, who've got hooked on to K-drama or who have got hooked on to K-pop and have found some kind of relief from real situations of stress. They've come out of it. It doesn't matter the generation or whatever, they've done it. But there are certain people who've gone to the other extreme of wanting to so adapt to this difference for whatever reason, because there is a gap, because there's an insecurity, because there's a lack of understanding of their own roots. I don't know. Maybe that's too large a statement, but it's just about understanding and trying to assimilate. So while there's nothing wrong, each one to their own, take your preferences, do your thing. I think it's important for us, and a position of strength really for us, to examine this vis-a-vis our own cultural identity. And coming from Kerala myself, and also, being out of Kerala for a very long time, I think it's a very different perspective that you have when you look back at some of the traditions which we carry to Chennai, or we carry to Calcutta, or we carry to Delhi, or wherever else. You will find a Malayali, and here I'm becoming very local and parochial now. You will find a Malayali anywhere outside will still be doing various things, whether it is Onam or Vishu or whatever you will do, and you will continue making kuwa, you will continue making all of these things. All this will go on, but you're also like relocated, dislocated into a different milieu. So there will be many things here also that you will absorb. There will be many things from the outside that you will absorb. There are many things which you as a family has, adopted over a period of time. That's very difficult to dislodge. It's there. But what is happening now, interestingly, is that people are almost wanting to mask that identity and assume a new identity. So as Professor Kim yesterday was talking about the opaqueness of it all, So wanting to get into this very fluid space where you are not defined. Maybe your name gives you away, but there's nothing there. Now you have strange names which people like Elon Musk have given their children. I mean, sad for the children, but it's like almost a name which doesn't define you to any place or age or anything like that. So what is this necessity? How come they have not found Indian parallels? There are Indian Idol shows. We've got a huge fan culture here from Bollywood to otherwise, which is there. How come they have not found certain... I mean, there are a lot of people here who imitate what the stars wear, how they dress, what they do. There's a huge fan following there as well. So somewhere I think it is, I hesitate to call it a lack in any way, but it is a kind of a grappling with otherness. It's a grappling with difference. It's trying to find out whether you can bring in different aspects to enhance or to pronounce who you are. Whereas I feel for the boomer generation, maybe, because we've been in this sort of like in between the kind of flower power age to, moving on to grappling with technology, with having to carry on. I haven't seen that much of a need for this sort of transformation, if you like, like presenting it on your sleeve that I am different. I have, found something which has given me that sense of identity. So whether it is, as I said, coloring your hair, to using Korean cosmetics, to the food, or to whatever, there's a certain code which you cannot really change, which is already there. It's like people's absolute agonizing efforts to become size 0. Now, this size 0 has led, if you go to Nimhans and look at their records, it has led to such a lot of psychological trauma. And again, because you had the Kareena Kapoors of the world following that, and people saying you sort of starve yourself to get into this look, which is genetically not going to happen. It's not going, and physiognomy wise, not going to happen. So when will we come to a position of rejoicing with what we have? Negotiate and understand difference, absorb whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever makes you happy. That's your choice. But not try to overly influence everybody else to change. It's like saying, no, how do you exercise? Each one has their own way. One wants to run, one wants to swim, one wants to meditate, one wants to diet, one wants to do, all of this is fine. So you find your rhythm and follow that. That's the beauty of it, I guess. For this Gen Z, that is the beauty of it, that you've got so many choices. That's also the challenge of it. Which choice will you take? Which choice will you make your own? Right.
Thank you, Dr. Rathi. It has been the plurality, negotiating the plurality of India itself has been one kind of fluid existence for, I think, for us. For Indians, I think if we can negotiate our plurality as Indians located in our own little statehoods, not losing sight of our Indianness in the wake of our own state identity, I think that itself would be able to locate us in our own, I don't want to use the term definiteness, but where you can be sure of yourself, I think.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely vital point, because if you look at South Korea in terms of population, 55 million, it's about the size of Tamil Nadu. So anything that happens there, anything that is promoted there is not a blip on the radar. It's very prominent, very well seen, very well spread. And it's a country with the fastest internet speeds. It's the most connected kind of country. So anything that happens in Busan is immediately known further up, right up in Seoul and beyond. Anything east, west, easy. You can traverse a country very quickly, and it's all very tightly connected. In India, as you rightly say, because of the plurality which we have, which we often talk as a big strength, but it's also a huge stumbling block. Because if you ask us to define our Indianness, we'd most probably go back to our regional selves and our regionalities before we come on to anything Indian. So how are we going to promote something? That's why I think we've got to always take it as a kind of apples and oranges comparison. Go back to maybe a kind of a region-wise comparison. And again, I come back to Kerala. Kerala is doing a lot of things which is being already done in South Korea in quite a similar manner, from tourism and culture being closely linked, sports and culture being closely linked, traditional Ayurveda, or whether you take Kalari or whatever it may be, wellness techniques being linked, language being given that precedence. I mean, still in Kerala, you have major festivals, major events where you don't use English at all, and it's quite unapologetic. You'll have a translator there, or you'll bring your own translator and you'll do it. But everywhere else, there is this urgency for us to sort of, dissuade people from using their regional languages because you want to be accepted and you want to be understood. In Korea, very often you would have whole meetings going on with simultaneous translation. Not that they don't understand the language, but it is important for them to use their language in order to preserve their identity. So I think that pride, that resurgence of regional, national pride is very, very important. And that's what we tend to be losing sight of as we go into this kind of, it's a kind of melee of everything. While it's great that we circumnavigate the world at a click of a button, it's fantastic. That is really, really unprecedented, and it's to be rejoiced at. But I don't think we should lose the core, lose the essence.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. And I think Jibin George, are you there? Okay, Jibin, what do you think of this kind of exporting India, or the Indianness? What can media do about it?
Well, Well, that depends upon the Korean people, I would say. If they are really interested in understanding, just like we are interested in understanding the Korean culture, if the Korean people are really interested in understanding the Indian culture, then they will definitely be following the Indian cinematic world or the Indian music. And to an extent it is happening also. If you look at YouTube and all, we can see Korean YouTubers actually reacting to Indian multi-star films, the trailers and songs. You can see various Korean YouTubers reacting to these trailers and songs. And so there are Koreans who are really interested in understanding the Indian culture. So apart from that, mainly the Indian media is mainly focused for the Indian people in general. So that's my take on it.
There you said it, because Indian media is focused for the Indian people in India. But
Yes.
I have found that Korean media is not just focused on Korean people for Korea. They want to advertise their locality. That's the difference. They want to make it kind of local.
If
There's
I
a
can
kind of
just come,
localization. Yes.
sorry, if I can just come in to say that they do have an agency called Kofis, and they do have an agency which is Korea News, which quite actively calls for bloggers from around the world and writers. So people like Milin, you might want to check that out, to write and critique and talk about it from an Indian or whatever country perspective of how, and they do appoint reporters and other things also. There's also the agencies like Yonhap News, for instance, which is very local and part of the KTN and various other television networks there. But a lot of that also gets sent through Reuters and through others. It gets very carefully sent to various countries in order to promote a particular concept, or whether it is music or visual arts or whatever it may be. So there are regular those news feeds also happening. Combination of local and global is going on. And in Korea, there is, as of a couple of years ago, the Indian festival, which started off with the embassy, which we support as well, where we try and take Indian content with music and food and some amount of performing arts going across to do it. And it's a slow trickle, but it's beginning to happen, slowly beginning to happen. Not just mainstream Bollywood, because I think that has got all the resources to promote itself, but we're looking more at independent artists, at those who have so much of value to add, who from traditional roots are also doing contemporary things and still staying relevant. So that's the area for us. It is the contemporary relevance of tradition that's important. So even K-pop and Indian popular music, how is it pulling from traditional roots but reworking itself in order to be of contemporary relevance? Like I was telling you about the Kathakali and the Pansori. It cannot stay locked in those traditional formats alone.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, Milin.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I have to say a few things that I have observed in media. Maybe Miss Rathi Jafer can back me up where I'm going to say things that are wrong. One thing that I have noticed is that there is a lot of interracial marriages in Korea. And I think maybe this global attraction towards South Korea is attracting a lot of people around the world to move to South Korea to find their significant other in South Korea and get married to them. So I have seen a lot of videos of Indians getting married to South Koreans. And I think lately I have seen an Instagram reel. It was a bunch of South Koreans wearing sari and dancing to a Hollywood song. So there is a mixture of culture. There is everything. There is American, there is Korean, there is Indian, and I think that maybe in the next 50 years there is going to be a lot of cultural influx into South Korea. Maybe exactly like what happened in America. Like people around the world went to America to get a better lifestyle, and there is a mixture of culture. There is Jewish, there is Indian, there is a lot of races in America. Maybe after a few years, some may come into such a state. I do not know how to explain this in a cultural scenario. But I think that it's possible. And when people move from India to South Korea, they are not leaving their culture behind. They're taking it with them. As long as they are regionally centered. I think I have seen wedding ceremonies in the YouTube channel where both Indian and Korean these functions are being conducted. So I think that Indian and Korean culture can go hand in hand. But quite ironically, I haven't seen Koreans coming to India. Like such videos, I don't think that I have seen such ones. So I think that an influx is possible. And maybe
Yeah.
one day South Korea may end up like America.
Yeah, Milin, actually what you say is interesting because it is still a very rare occurrence, I would say, because Korea has for a very long time been accused of being
Homogeneous.
fairly homogeneous and monoculture, and 35 long years of absolutely no integration or no interaction called Hermit Kingdom, and completely cut off from the rest of the world, and then gradually opening. So even we from
Yes.
2006 onwards, when I went first to Korea in 2007, there were hardly any signs even with English. Most of it, everything was in Korean, and it was quite a task to sort of move from place. Very friendly people and extremely helpful and all of that. But gradually, you could see how this has changed. Very, very gradually. In the cultural sector, you will find that even right up to the director, maybe somebody who will continue talking in Korean, but they will have as coordinator someone who's educated in the UK or the US and speaks English fluently. They will be your interface to make sure that that you that. Therefore, slowly but surely, there's been a shift now. Again, as Professor Kim was saying yesterday, that it's important to learn the language for you to become a global citizen. And in India, they recognize that India, I think both in terms of numeracy and literacy, because we have been able to use the language so much to our advantage, today on the world stage, when it comes to technical skills and all other things being equal, we still have an edge because we know the language. So this thing of talking about marriages, interracial marriages are a much more recent phenomenon, gradually getting accepted, not the norm by any stretch of the imagination. So even here in India, we have a couple of interracial marriages, Korean women, Indian men settling in varying degrees of success, because there are, as I said, there's an Asian grid on which they function, but there's also a very distinct Korean and I think a very distinct Indian angle to it as well. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's yet very common, but it's happening. It's gradually moving in that direction. I think even in terms of how they greet and link with foreigners, earlier there used to be a lot of you could feel a kind of a little bit of that distance, arms length, polite, all the rest of it correct, but then you wouldn't, for instance, you don't often get immediately invited into a Korean home. In India, we would do that straight off. You'd say, "Come and have dinner with me." Open.
Yes.
That may be because of the plurality we're used to. But for them,
Yes.
it's not so common. So it's a big deal if you're invited to someone's home for a meal. That's the kind of ultimate acceptance that, okay, you are like part of us. So it does definitely takes a while. There is a language divide even now, getting smaller and getting more, less perceptive, less seen now, but it's still there. Definitely, you have that. There is still, if you go to the American International School, the Korean school in Deccanal, the Deccanal International, where there's about 60% Korean students. Even today, the biggest problem the management faces is that when it's lunch break or any break, all the Korean kids would come together. They would all be having their meal together. And how to then break that and integrate them into the rest is a big, big, big thing. So we find that in our classrooms, and one of the first things we do is to try and avoid that, try and make everybody feel that they're part of the whole. But our native teacher will only speak in Korean. From day one, you will be speaking only in Korean, no English at all. And you can't even come through transliteration or through a regional route. You've got to engage in Korean to do it that way. So these are all very interesting trends and flows, I think, which as part of this seminar, maybe Jyoti, it would be good to look at with the student contribution and other things. What are these ebbs and tides which are happening and the kind of flows which are obviously connected on the one side to the world shrinking and coming closer together, but definitely with the influence of technology. How is technology driving this? And how far are we going to post-pandemic? How are we going to be doing this digitally? But how are we going to negotiate as we go forward? Because there'll be hard questions asked. Can we easily go back to that normalcy which we took so for granted? We don't know. So in this sort of very fluid, interconnected boundaries where, as someone, I think maybe Dr. Lata said yesterday, cartographies don't matter. Maybe it is a time for us now to see what is a way in which, from a cultural standpoint, we can strengthen this dialogue.
So thank you, Dr. Rathi and Ms. Milin. And I think as we are short of time, maybe we could ask Sona or Anakha or Arah. Do you want to add to what is being said here? Anakha? Sona? Or Arah, would you like to add to what is being said here about this intercultural dialogue and how India and Korea should stay as InKo?
Ma'am, I
I
think.
would like to think.
Go on.
Okay, Arah.
Like earlier, Jibin sir said that in Korea, if we wanted to know more about the culture, we can always go to K-drama, K-pop, and other cultural related, entertainment industries. Like, I think Korea is the only country that has a Ministry of Culture, and they're so focused in, having this soft power over the regions, and as Jibin sir said, when it comes to India, the only way they can really understand our culture is through cinemas or films. Like, we don't have a separate industry for music or dance or other, like everything is packed into one industry, that's the film industry. And people may not find it easy to access. Like, there may be people who are interested in Indian music, but they'd have to sit and watch an entire movie to listen to that music. And if you search that song in YouTube and all, you know, uh, the it's not the singers that are shown in the videos; it's the actors and actresses having dancing and all. So if you want to know more about the singer, then again you have to search on Google. So it's the Indian entertainment industry is not as vast as the Korean. So I think that's the major reason that a lot of Korean people are not that invested in the Indian culture and all. I think if we focus more on how we present ourselves to the world, the people may become interested in our culture and our entertainment industries.
Thank you, Arah. Now, Sona, quickly put forth your view, please.
Yes, ma'am. I think somebody talked about Korean vloggers reacting to Indian videos. But if you look at it in a local perspective, I have seen videos of people asking the Korean natives, like the local people there, the citizens, they really don't know much about India. The only things they know about is Mahatma Gandhi. I have seen people quoting Mahatma Gandhi a lot in Korea. Then the only song they know is Tunak Tunak, and that's it. They don't really know about the Indian culture as such, and they don't really listen to Indian songs or watch Indian movies. The only Indian movies they know about is Three Idiots or movies that went viral globally. But there are so many good movies that are made in India. I think India should focus more on investing on independent artists rather than only focusing on film industry. I think if we give more importance to the Indian music culture, because we have very vast culture. If you look at Rajasthan, if you look at Gujarat, if you look at Kerala, different states have a different music culture as well. I think if we focus more on promoting this culture, I think we can also achieve what Korea has achieved. I think that's my take on this. If we have
Thank
to
you.
actually promote it globally.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sona. Now I think Vishnu Priya from the audience has something to add to it. So Vishnu Priya, it's your turn.
Thank you, ma'am. I just want to add to what Sona said. She said I would like to say that about the promotion. Like there are some artists in America that represent Indian culture and sing, but only some people know about her here. Like there is one singer named Rajakumari. Like she's a rapper and she was once nominated for Grammys, but only a few people in India know about her. Like I only came to know about her in about 2 or 3 years before, and she is a person that really put forward our culture to American. Like in one of her songs, she also said that the type of an NRI. Like she said, when we come to India, people say that we are not representing her as a leader, but when they go to America, she is just an Indian, but not an American. So like that, there are many artists in India which promote our culture in other countries, but only a few people here knows about them. For example, now in Korea, like that drama, it came in that the character played Ali. He has played many dramas before, but right now, just when he acted on that drama, only people came to know about him. He was there promoting Indian culture a long way before. Just now only we came to know about him. So there are much people around the world who supports our culture and promotes it, but only a few people supports them in here. And also about what Jibin sir said, like the YouTubers reacting to Bollywood films. There are actresses like Deepika Padukone is really respected in Korea. Like many YouTubers really say that, oh my God, she's so beautiful. She has pretty eyes. She has pretty smiles. But only a few people knows about it because of the promotion. Like media has a very good importance in promoting culture, but they don't really promote our movies in other countries as we expect them to. If they do that, I think our culture would be much more famous around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishnu Priya. So I think we've been negotiating a factor, a very unique factor of cultural, I should say, amalgamation or cultural exchange, cultural plurality in a very different way through different types of modes of expressions. Yesterday we had 2 keynote sessions, a number of paper presentations, particularly on India and Korea, and how K-pop or K-factor, K-culture, K-drama, and K-art, because some of the K-pop people have turned to K-art as well. So those things have been dealt with through the various paper presentations in the past. Yesterday. Today also we'll have paper presentations in the afternoon, negotiating different aspects of the same. And I think we are actually trying to look at a a plural affair from a 720 angle, I would say, because the Hallyu is generally spoken of as the Americanization, as I mentioned earlier, the Americanization of a post-war Korea, or a subtle satire on the American dream, the visibility of Asia in the international scene, a kind of cultural colonization, hegemony, an aesthetic experience, a soulful experience, and a lot more. It is a lot of products being shipped to and from, and it's a way of bringing people together. So if you look at a heterogeneous expression from a homogeneous perspective is not going to work out well. And any cultural exchange is a matter not of appropriation but of appreciation. And every kind of amalgamation is to be achieved not through coercion but through consent. And I hope if the InKo consent can work out wonders, why not? And I hope on that positive note, let's close this panel discussion. And I must stay indebted to Dr. Rathi Jafer for taking us through the various aspects of it so effortlessly, with effortless ease, I would say, because it was fantastic listening to you. And I must also appreciate the presence of Nandini Menon, because it has been wonderful looking at you and your beautiful expression, because it's very encouraging. And thank you, Jibin, for accepting our invitation and being a millennial and a media, two M's in a Korean wave, which matter actually in a Korean wave. Thank you, Milin, again for bringing a touch of novelty, as you usually do, to criticizing and to looking at things in a different way. Thank you, Sona, Anakha, and Arah for being the Korean enthusiast that you are, and for sharing your expression here. It has been a wonderful forenoon, and no better way could ever be thought of. So let me thank everyone for this coming together, and lots of people were listening also. Thank you, dears, for investing me with this kind of and intra discussions. It's been as much looking within, reflection, self-reflection, as much as it was external. Thank you. So,
thank you, Jyoti, for your energy and your engagement. It was fun talking to you. You really steered it so well and got us talking. I am hoping that following this conference and this engagement, that we will have lots more to talk about, lots more to offer your students.
Yes.
And please keep the conversation going from your side, from the department. Nandini, as I said,